Hey YouTube, if you've just arrived here from my previous video where we made chili, we're going to be canning chili. So this is kind of a follow-up part 2 to making chili and canning chili. If you're just here because you want to learn how to can the chili that you've already made, we're going to do that too. So the timing may be different on the canning processing time, but other than that, probably the same because you're going to have beans and meat. I have 2 pots of chili here because yesterday I made one of my big batches and then I decided if I'm going to can it, I might as well can as much as I can. Anyway, so I made another batch this morning. So this one has been cooking for an hour and a half and it's still fairly liquid because the beans haven't absorbed all of that liquid yet. This one is very thick because it sat in the refrigerator overnight last night after I cooked it and added all the seasoning. If you want to know the recipe, you can check out that prior video and then come back over here, join me back here. I'm going to assume if you are wanting to can chili that you already probably know how to can or you know some basics. I wouldn't recommend this being the first thing you try with a pressure canner just because it's, I wouldn't say it's advanced, but meat and things are a little bit more advanced than say starting with something like green beans, which I will link to that video here if you want to start canning. So you kind of already know how to can, but I'll just tell you what we're going to be using. I have my canning pot back over there ready to go. Pressure canner, that's the only way that I can anything meat or beans. I'm using wide mouth pints because mostly we use these for lunches for my husband and he likes to be able to just heat this up at work and just eat it right out of the jar. You're going to need non-reusable canning caps that will seal to the jar. You're going to be using a reusable lid. I have my handy dandy jar lifter there for taking jars in and out of the canning pot. I've got this little magnet doohickey, which if you are like me and I still put the lids in hot water while the jars are being filled, you'll need this magnet to pull them out of the water. If you don't, if you just use your lids dry and put them right on the jars, then you won't need this. I will show you a trick with this later though. You'll need a bubble freer, or as I like to call it, the butter knife, because I don't buy special tools for things like that. And because this is chili with meat, you're going to need vinegar, because we're going to be using vinegar on a rag. Once these jars are full, we're going to be wiping it. This, you want no fat on that rim, and better than a wet washcloth, we need vinegar to make sure there's no fat on that contact point. And if you're like me and you have canned and used the same jars for literally decades, please make sure, especially like this, I'm going to be making a lot of jars of chili and I don't want any of them to not seal. So take the time to check every single one and make sure there are no nicks and dings and chips in the rim. You have to have a perfectly flat surface for that to seal in the jar. 2 more things you're going to need: canning funnel, because you're going to use that to put stuff right in the jar and it makes your life a lot easier, and of course a ladle because we're going to be filling jars. I've moved the canning pot onto the stove and I'm going to start warming up. There should be, and if you're used to canning, you know there's going to be some water in the bottom of this canning pot, which for mine was about 3 quarts of water. All right, so this is warming up to get ready to go in the jars, and the jars are all hot. You want to make sure the jars are sterilized for this kind of canning too. I like to run them through the dishwasher on the sanitized setting, and I am going to add a little bit of extra water to this because it's fairly thick already and it's going to get even thicker in the jars. So you want to, when you're canning chili, especially if the beans aren't entirely done, which these are not, you know they're going to keep absorbing water as you can, and so you want to have it going into the jars just a little bit soupier than what you want to see in your finished jar. So I'm going to call that pretty good because we like our chili really thick and that will accomplish that. So I'm going to let that continue to get hot. Once it's hot, we're going to start filling the jars. And if you're like me and you like to put your caps in hot water, and I always do, I don't think you need to, but it's just habit. I can't get the nerve up to can these without getting these in hot water first and warming up the seal. So trick for that, if you're going to put these in water and see how they come and they're all stacked together, and if you take a magnet and try and get them apart, you're going to get 2. And if these have been in hot water and you try and get those apart, you're going to get a little burst of hot water that will come out from between the lids and burn your hand. So I have learned over the years, again, if you're using water, put them in alternating. So one facing up, one facing down, one facing up, and so on. So you're alternating directions. And then when you go to get them out of the water, you're just gonna get one. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these in the water, and I'll also make a note. The recipe will be in the other video, actually. It's going to be in the description of the prior video with the recipe for this, but I will let you know how much that recipe made for jars, because everyone likes to know how many jars are we going to get. At the end of this video, we'll also find out how many jars we got. This is hot enough, so we've got our jars and the canning funnel here. I wouldn't want to even try to do this without a canning funnel. So I'm going to just fill these to 1 inch headspace and measure to find out what 1 inch is, because I canned for probably 28 plus years before I started realizing that a lot of my problems with the product boiling up out of the jar during the processing time was because I was not measuring 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch. I was eyeballing it, and apparently I am not good at eyeballing that. So I'm going to fill these, and then I actually use a tape measure and just get an eyeball on what is actually an inch. So, and you can see this is going in, and it is, like we looked at, more liquid than you would want to have a finished product. But once they can, you're going to absorb some of that liquid into the beans as it processes and even as it sets in the jars. And I actually keep this little tiny measuring tape in the kitchen just for projects like this. So I'll actually just measure. I usually put the 2 inch line at the top of the jar, and I'll usually do this sitting on the counter so I can look right across the level, but I'm just gonna do it like that. And basically 1 inch is just below that first ring. So I'm gonna just add a little bit more and just bring it up. And with these, because you know you're gonna absorb some of that liquid into the beans, it probably is better to err on the side of not enough in the jar, because if the beans absorb the liquid, you can see where the physics would take you. And once you have your level correct in that jar, we're gonna take, I use a paper towel and your vinegar, and just get the paper towel damp with the vinegar. And this is where you're gonna go around the rim of that jar and just get it squeaky clean in case there's any droplets of grease that might have gotten on there. So we're gonna use the magnet, grab a single cap, put that on. Jar is hot, screw on a lid, and you don't want it super tight. You are not holding this jar sealed tight by the fact that you screwed it on so tight. You just want it finger tight. Just go to where you get resistance and just give a little push. And that's ready to go in the canning pot. And for those of us who can and have canned for a long time, did you know that I had canned for probably, again, 28 to 30 years before I realized that if the jars are short, you can stack a double layer in the canning pot. I can't believe I'm this dumb. Anyway, I saved one of my very old racks from the bottom of some ancient canning pot from the 90s. But you can put a layer of jars, put this, and then put a second layer of jars in pressure canning situations and in water bath. I've done both. So you can double your production. Oh my goodness, how did I not know this? You can't believe how many hours and days of my life I have spent sitting in front of a single batch in a can, 8 jars at a time, when I could have been doing 16 or more. Like, I'm gonna get the rest of these filled and in there, and we'll be back to see what the next steps are. And you can see how you can get a second layer in here. So I'm gonna be able to get 16 jars in here. So if you haven't learned this yet in your canning journey, you're never too old to learn something new. I had canned for literally some decades before I realized this was a thing. Again, I don't know how I missed it, but there you go. Something you can learn. So we've got 16 jars in here now. I'm gonna put my lid on, and they normally have a handle on both sides. We won't talk about why this one only has one, but there might have been a hammer involved. So it will fit on, and you pull it, rotate it to lock it. There is a little gauge, weighted gauge. This does not go on yet. We're gonna turn the heat up all the way to high, and then we're going to let this heat until you see a steady stream of steam coming out of that little opening. And once you do, then you're going to let that vent for 10 minutes with a steady stream coming out. Once you get 10 minutes of that with that stream of steam coming out, then you will put this on, and that will continue to raise the pressure. We're gonna go to 12 pounds of pressure here. Because of my altitude, I know I need 12 pounds. And we're gonna let this, once it hits pressure, you wanna hold it at 12 pounds, not above and not below. You can go above a little, but be very careful. And if it drops below your goal pressure, you're gonna need to start the timing over again. So do not let it drop under your desired pressure or you'll be starting over. Hold it at 12 or slightly above, but you wanna watch this. I just pull up a chair and I'll sit here for the whole processing time. And the processing time on this chili is going to be 75 minutes once it hits that 12 pounds of pressure. So you don't wanna start that over. That's a long day. So we're gonna watch this and then we'll sit for 75 minutes once we get up to temp. If you're making your own recipe of chili, your pressure canning time might be different. You're gonna need to know some things about canning, like I said, if you're gonna do this, but your time is going to be based on whatever in that jar takes the longest. For me in this jar, it's the meat. I need 75 minutes to process meat. If you add corn though, look at that, because I think corn is a longer processing time. If I'm not mistaken, it might be more like 80 or 85 minutes. So basically base your timing. If you're making your own soups like this, your pressure time needs to be based on whatever in that jar needs the most amount of time, no matter what else is in the jars. And you can see we're getting a pretty steady stream there. So I'm gonna set my timer for 10 minutes. And you can see that just popped up too. We got some pressure under there. So we're gonna set a timer for 10 minutes. And you can walk away at this point, but once that 10 minutes is up, you need to come back, pull up a chair, bring a book, bring a cross stitch or whatever, and we're gonna need to sit and watch this gauge for pretty much the whole next 75 minutes. All right, that has been 10 minutes, so we're just gonna drop that on there and start watching this gauge. And I've marked it with a Sharpie just so I can see it better, but you can see where that mark is. I'm just gonna watch that carefully and I'll be turning the heat down as it approaches close to that. As it gets up in the 9 to 10 range, I'm gonna start turning the heat down so that it slows down, because you can fly right past your temp if you're not careful and you leave it on high. So we'll just start slowly, gradually turning the temp down so we bring that pressure up a little bit slower than just, a blast of high heat. And we are just very, very close to almost 12 pounds. You can see it just needs to go a little bit further there. So I'm gonna watch this very closely, and as soon as it crosses just through that line that I've got marked, I'm gonna set my timer for 75 minutes. And then is when I really sit here and I literally just put a chair in front of the canning pot and I'll sit here for the whole time and work on something. I'll usually cross stitch or read a book or whatever, but you've gotta be paying attention to the style gauge. Do not walk away from it. You can cause some serious, serious problems if you do. So this has just done 75 exact minutes, and we're gonna go ahead and turn off the heat under this, and then we're not gonna do anything else. We're just gonna let this sit and cool all the way down. So we wanna see that pressure drop all the way down to like below zero, just nothing. And once it does, you'll see this drop down into the pot. And at that point, I will take that little weighted gauge off and I will let it sit for a little while, even like that. And then once it has sat for at least 5 minutes with that off, I'll crack the lid and actually let it sit with the lid cracked to vent some of that heat and steam from inside for another 5 minutes, and then we'll take the jars out. So this has been, I took this off already. This has been depressurized for a while, but I'm just gonna go ahead and crack this lid for a little bit. And you can see how much steam is still coming out of that. So we're gonna just let that kind of sit. I usually give it about 5 minutes to just let some of that steam vent. So we've just taken the lid off and I already heard one pop. So they're starting to seal already. So I'm gonna go ahead and this is where the jar lifter comes in, and just carefully, and you don't want to bump these rings as you pull these out. So try and grab just the jar, and look how nice that looks. And so I'll just put all of these on a towel to sit through the night. So there they all are sitting on a towel and you can hear them popping. That is the sound you're looking for when you're canning. You want to hear these lids seal. And tomorrow I will come back. I'm going to let these sit undisturbed all night, and tomorrow we'll come back and check and make sure that that is sealed down. So all of these look like they may have already sealed, but we want to make sure. So tomorrow we're going to watch for that. And then we will put the date on them, and these are ready to go in the cabinet for lunches and dinners later this year. Hope this inspires you to try canning your own chili at home. It's not that hard. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.